They celebrated his return, but no one noticed what he had become. When Major Charles Rain steps back into civilian life after enduring years in a North Vietnamese prison, he's welcomed with flags, medals, and shallow handshakes. But behind that forced patriotism hides a disturbing reality. Rain isn't whole. The war didn't end for him, it just changed locations. And Rolling Thunder isn't your standard action flick. It's a pressure cooker of grief, numbness, and violent ritual masquerading as justice. Directed by John Flynn, with a script originally penned by Paul Schrader and later revised by Haywood Gould, this 1977 film dives into the psychological wreckage left behind by war. It's a revenge tale, yes, but one stripped of Hollywood gloss. The violence is cold, the silence is deafening, and every movement feels like a man going through the motions of survival. When it first premiered, the studio didn't quite know what to do with it. The film felt too dark, too slow-burning, too personal. It was trimmed, censored, and quietly released. But over the years, Rolling Thunder found its audience one viewer at a time. Quentin Tarantino would go on to call it one of the greatest action films of all time and name a company after it. But for all the praise, the movie still hides secrets, abandoned footage, rewritten scenes, and emotional truths that slipped under the radar. This is a film forged in trauma, and the 20 facts behind its creation are every bit as strange, unsettling, and unforgettable as the film itself. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Rolling Thunder. Fact 1. The ending that was removed without warning. Before audiences ever saw Rolling Thunder, its original final scene had already vanished. In the earliest cut, Major Rain doesn't walk out of the brothel in stoic triumph. He sits motionless, surrounded by death, as the camera lingers in uncomfortable silence. It wasn't the ending the studio wanted. Executives at 20th Century Fox believed the film needed a cleaner resolution, a moment of action, a sense of closure. They found the original ending too ambiguous, too bleak, and perhaps most dangerously, too honest. So it was changed. The final edit cut out those long, quiet shots and reshaped the conclusion into something more digestible. The audience still got blood and revenge, but none of the emotional fallout. Haywood Gould later described the lost ending as the one scene that told the truth, that after all the killing, there's nothing left to feel. And that's exactly what terrified the studio. That version of the ending has never surfaced, not on home video, not in archives, not in director's cuts. It's as if it was never meant to be remembered. But those who knew it existed say it would have turned a brutal revenge film into something even more disturbing, a quiet eulogy for a man already gone. Fact 2. Tommy Lee Jones rewrote one line that changed everything. There's a moment late in the film when Major Rain turns to his war buddy and asks, "You ready?" The answer, from Tommy Lee Jones, is bone dry. "I've been ready since I got back." That chilling line was never in the script. Originally, Johnny's response was longer, more emotional, more explanatory. But Jones felt it rang false. He believed the character, like Rain, wouldn't talk about feelings. He wouldn't philosophize. He'd just act. So Jones suggested the change on set. Flynn agreed. They ran with it. And in doing so, they created one of the film's most unforgettable moments. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. But it lands like a gut punch, delivered with the weight of years spent trying to feel nothing. The line isn't just memorable, it's perfect. Because in a film about emotional detachment, Jones delivers a response so numb it says everything. Fact 3. Schrader disowned the script, but it never left him. Paul Schrader has written some of the darkest, most tortured characters in cinema. But before Taxi Driver or American Gigolo, there was Rolling Thunder, a screenplay so personal, he walked away from it. Originally, Schrader intended the story to be a bleak meditation on violence, guilt, and ritual. Major Rain wasn't just a man seeking revenge, he was a figure going through a process of spiritual disintegration. But before filming began, the studio hired Haywood Gould to revise the script, adding structure and softening its existential edge. Schrader wasn't happy. He distanced himself from the project, publicly. But even after he disowned it, the themes from Rolling Thunder followed him. He would later reuse many of its emotional motifs, loneliness, suppressed rage, self-destruction in his later work. In some ways, Rolling Thunder became the skeleton key to his filmography, a prototype of the broken men he'd returned to again and again. So while Schrader may have walked away from the credits, he never really left the film behind. Fact 4. The hook was modeled after a real soldier's prosthetic. One of the film's most jarring visual elements, Major Rain's sharpened metal hook, isn't just cinematic symbolism, it was rooted in reality. Paul Schrader reportedly drew inspiration from an article he read about a Vietnam veteran who returned home with a primitive prosthetic arm. The man, rather than opting for a natural-looking replacement, wore a steel hook deliberately rough, unpolished, and impossible to ignore. For Schrader, it represented something deeper than injury. It was a way of refusing to let the world look away. The trauma wasn't hidden, it was put on display. In Rolling Thunder, the hook evolves into more than a prosthetic. It becomes Rain's defining feature, a ritual object, a weapon, a reminder that he no longer fits into civilian life. And when he begins sharpening it before confronting his enemies, the gesture is quiet, eerie, and deeply symbolic. It's not a Hollywood action trope, it's a slow burn of psychological truth. The hook is what's left when everything else has been stripped away. Fact 5. The final shootout was inspired by a murky local legend. The brutal climax of Rolling Thunder, a methodical shootout in a brothel, has a strange origin. It wasn't pulled from another revenge film. It came from a rumor. John Flynn once shared that he had heard of a real incident involving two veterans in Texas who took the law into their own hands after failing to get help through official channels. They walked into a bar linked to criminal activity and started shooting. The story was never confirmed. No charges were filed. It existed more as a whispered cautionary tale than a documented event. Flynn and Schrader didn't recreate the scenario beat for beat, but they borrowed the spirit, the sense that these men didn't snap. They calculated. They returned to violence because it was the only language the world had ever let them speak. That quiet certainty saturates the final scene. It's not reckless, it's ritual, and it may have mirrored something real just beneath the surface. Fact 6. The garbage disposal scene nearly earned an X rating. The most infamous moment in Rolling Thunder happens in Rain's own kitchen. It's not a shootout. It's not a battle cry. It's the slow, horrifying image of his hand being shoved into a garbage disposal. The scene is quiet, clinical. There's no music, no cuts, just the mechanical drone of the appliance and the look in Devane's eyes. When the film was submitted to the MPAA, the response was immediate. They considered the scene too intense, not because of blood, but because of realism. The emotional tone was too raw, too disturbing. The pain wasn't theatrical, it was personal. Fox was told to make cuts or receive an X rating. Director John Flynn resisted, but eventually agreed to trim just enough frames to satisfy the censors. Even with those edits, the scene remains hard to watch. It's not just a moment of brutality, it's the exact point where the film stops being a revenge story and becomes something else entirely. Fact 7. Tarantino tried to bring it back from obscurity. To Quentin Tarantino, Rolling Thunder wasn't just a great film, it was a cornerstone. He didn't just recommend it to friends, he built an entire company around it. In the 1,990 seconds, when Tarantino launched his distribution label Rolling Thunder Pictures, the name was no accident. He credited the film with shaping his approach to tension, violence, and character. He called it one of the greatest action movies ever made. But admiration wasn't enough. Tarantino wanted to re-release the film in theaters. He hoped to restore it, remaster it, and bring attention to the parts of it that had been buried, especially the original ending. Despite his influence in the industry, he hit a wall. Rights were tangled. Studio interest was minimal. The original elements, if they still existed, were locked away or forgotten. His dream of a full revival never happened. Still, its fingerprints are everywhere in his work. The silences before violence, the cold, calculated pacing, characters who act more than speak. He couldn't bring it back, but he made sure it would never be forgotten. Fact 8. Devane only got the role after everyone else said no. Today, William Devane is synonymous with Major Charles Rain, detached, measured, deadly. But he wasn't the studio's top pick. Not even close. Producers originally approached higher-profile actors. James Caan declined, saying the character was too empty. Charles Bronson reportedly didn't want to play another quiet killer. Steve McQueen was mentioned but was unavailable or unwilling, depending on who you ask. By the time the script reached Devane, the studio had lowered expectations. But John Flynn saw something different. He believed Devane's subtlety, his ability to do nothing and still command the frame, was exactly what the role needed. Devane accepted, and his performance became iconic. He didn't play rage, he played absence, the stillness, the void. That wasn't Plan B. That was what made the film unforgettable. Fact 9. The original trailer was so unsettling, it got yanked. Most movie trailers are designed to build hype. The original trailer for Rolling Thunder did the opposite. It disturbed people. The footage was harsh and fragmented. Quick cuts of Rain's mutilation, slow shots of his expressionless face, a low, monotone voiceover whispering lines like, "They took his hand, he's taking theirs. It didn't land well. Audiences were confused. Some theaters received complaints. At least one regional manager refused to show it, calling it disturbing and misleading. Fox reacted fast. The trailer was quietly pulled from circulation and replaced with a more action-focused version. The original trailer was never released commercially. Only a few grainy bootleg copies survive, shared among collectors. And those who've seen it say it wasn't just promoting a movie, it was warning you about one. Fact 10. Rain was never meant to survive. In its earliest form, Rolling Thunder didn't end with Rain walking out of the brothel. It ended with him dying there alone, bloodied and spent. Paul Schrader's original screenplay saw Major Rain as a man consumed by ritual. Revenge wasn't his salvation, it was his suicide. The final shootout wasn't about triumph, it was an act of spiritual erasure. Schrader wanted Rain to die, not for drama, but because death was the only logical conclusion to his emptiness. But Fox wasn't willing to let that happen. Executives pushed back hard. They wanted an ending that left room for breath, maybe not hope, but survival. Schrader lost the battle. The death was cut. The walkout was added. He was furious. He later said that by sparing Rain's life, they robbed the film of its final truth, that violence doesn't fix you, it finishes you. And even though Rain lives in the final cut, it's debatable whether anything inside him actually did. Fact 11. Police saw the film as a dangerous blueprint. When Rolling Thunder premiered, it stirred more than critical conversation. It triggered real concern among law enforcement. Several police departments, particularly in the Midwest, voiced unease about the film's message. They believed it portrayed legal institutions as ineffective and painted vigilante justice in a sympathetic light. One sheriff warned that it could plant dangerous ideas in the wrong minds. There were no bans, no official censorship, but internally, discussions took place. Officers were briefed, and screenings in certain regions were discouraged. To the filmmakers, the accusations were misplaced. Schrader argued that the movie was about trauma, not inspiration. Flynn said Rain wasn't a hero, he was a ghost. Still, the fear lingered. Because Rolling Thunder didn't make violence look fun. It made it look inevitable, and that's what unsettled people most. Fact 12. A deleted scene quietly explained everything. There's a missing scene in Rolling Thunder that few have seen, but those who have say it changes everything. In the original cut, Rain visits a church. He doesn't participate. He doesn't pray. He simply watches a baptism from the shadows. As the baby is dipped in water, he whispers a line unscripted, low enough to miss, "Brand new, must be nice." The moment didn't test well. Viewers didn't know how to interpret it. Studio executives found it too slow, too ambiguous. It was removed before the final release and has never resurfaced. But editor Frank Uriost later said it was one of the only scenes that hinted at Rain's internal world. That beneath all the silence and control, there was still a man watching life go on without him and realizing he wasn't part of it. It wasn't about religion, it was about isolation. And that one quiet line may have spoken louder than any of his revenge. Fact 13. The hook was a real threat on set. Props are usually designed for safety, but Major Rain's metal hook wasn't your typical movie accessory. Instead of a lightweight rubber piece, the filmmakers went with cold, real metal, dense and sharp-edged. William Devane insisted on it. He believed the hook needed to feel authentic, both to him and to the viewer. Its weight, he claimed, affected how he moved, how he carried himself, how Rain existed in the world. But that realism came at a cost. During one rehearsal, Devane accidentally swung the hook too wide, striking a fellow actor in the shoulder. No serious injury occurred, but the moment shook the crew. It was a reminder that even fiction can cut too close. From then on, a softer replica was used for fast action scenes. But for the close-ups, the ones that lingered, Devane always went back to the original. Because for Rain, pain wasn't just something to relive, it was something to wear. Fact 14. The film lost a crew member over one scene. The home invasion sequence, where Rain is tortured and maimed, was always meant to be uncomfortable. But for one member of the crew, it went beyond storytelling. An assistant director left the production after that scene was blocked and rehearsed. He reportedly told colleagues that the depiction was too intimate, too real, not because of what it showed, but because of how it showed it slow, methodical, and without cinematic flair. Director John Flynn refused to sanitize it. He believed the scene was the film's emotional rupture point. To soften it would be to betray everything that followed. The crew adjusted. The scene stayed. Flynn later said that the goal wasn't to horrify it, was to hollow out the audience. "I wanted them to feel what it means when someone's humanity is taken, inch by inch." One man walked away. The rest stayed to finish what they started. Fact 15. A class screening turned into an unexpected confession. In the early 80 seconds, Rolling Thunder was screened during a college seminar on trauma and post-war identity. It wasn't the original plan the professor had intended to show a documentary, but opted for the film when the reel didn't arrive. He didn't expect what happened next. The room went quiet. One student left. Another veteran sat motionless for nearly an hour after the credits rolled. When asked why, he replied, "That's the closest thing I've seen to what it feels like." The professor began using the film in future sessions not as instruction, but as catalyst. It didn't offer answers. It offered recognition. It wasn't scientifically precise, but it was emotionally surgical. Some films explain things. Rolling Thunder doesn't. It mirrors them. And for those who've lived through that kind of silence, it says more than clinical language ever could. Fact 16. The final location was never meant for this genre. The brothel where Rolling Thunder ends in a hail of bullets wasn't built for a revenge thriller. In fact, it was left over from a completely different world, a western. Originally constructed as a saloon set for a low-budget cowboy film, the location sat abandoned until the Rolling Thunder crew discovered it during a scouting trip. The bones were perfect. Worn wood, tight hallways, and a sense of decay. Instead of building something new, they adapted it. They swapped out rustic furniture for cheap lamps and sleazy curtains. The result was uncanny. You could still feel the Western DNA underneath the veneer of 1,970-second sleaze. Flynn appreciated the irony. The location once meant for shootouts under the desert sun now hosted a quieter, more clinical violence. Guns were still drawn, but the motives were different. The codes of the Old West had evolved into the quiet desperation of modern veterans. And if you pause certain scenes, you might still catch glimpses of the past behind the plywood. Fact 17. The score came from someone who'd never scored like this. Barry Dvorak wasn't a typical pick for a film like Rolling Thunder. Known more for soft rock and TV themes, he didn't have a background in scoring bleak, psychological thrillers. That's exactly why he was hired. John Flynn didn't want a traditional soundtrack. He didn't want music that guided emotion. He wanted something colder, something that refused to comfort. Dvorak's approach was minimalist. The score consists of low hums, broken piano phrases, and long stretches of near silence. It doesn't build to anything. It hovers. It waits. At the time, audiences weren't sure what to make of it, but today, it's considered a crucial part of the film's atmosphere. It doesn't manipulate you. It leaves you with yourself, which, in a story like this, is more unsettling than any crescendo. Fact 18. A real veteran left the set in silence. To ensure Rolling Thunder felt grounded, the producers brought on a real-life POW as a technical advisor. His job was to guide the depiction of captivity, trauma, and reintegration. He didn't last a week. According to reports, the consultant became visibly uncomfortable during early script readings and rehearsals. He eventually left without making a scene. When asked why, he simply said, "It's too familiar." It wasn't the violence, it was the stillness, the quiet detachment, the way Rain moved and didn't speak. The portrayal was close enough to truth that it no longer felt like a movie. He feared the wrong message might come through, not because the film was wrong, but because it was right in ways the audience might misunderstand. His departure wasn't dramatic, but it left a mark. Because when someone who's lived the story walks away from the retelling, you know the fiction is sharper than you thought. Fact 19. The military didn't ban it, but they kept it off the base. Officially, Rolling Thunder was never blacklisted. Unofficially, it never made it onto the screening schedules of U.S. military bases. During the late 70 seconds and early 80 seconds, most bases had regular film nights, showcasing both blockbusters and smaller titles. But Rolling Thunder was consistently skipped, quietly. Intentionally. There was no written order, no public explanation. But base entertainment officers later confirmed they were advised to avoid showing films that could provoke emotional distress, especially among returning Vietnam veterans. And Rolling Thunder was at the top of that list. It wasn't the violence that worried them, it was the emotionless calm. The way Rain comes home and finds no answers, no comfort, only routine and numbness. That version of a soldier hit too close to what many were still living. So the film wasn't banned, it was ignored, left out, forgotten, at least in the places where it might have spoken the loudest. Sometimes, silence is the most effective form of censorship. Fact 20. A sequel almost happened, and then vanished completely. At one point, in the early 1,980 seconds, Rolling Thunder nearly got a sequel. The concept, reportedly titled Aftermath, would have followed Johnny Tommy Lee Jones's character years later. He'd be older, isolated, and pulled back into violence when someone targets the family of a fellow vet. The tone was said to be even darker, slower, more about memory than action. Early outlines were drafted. Producers were intrigued, but once Jones passed on the project and William Devane declined involvement, momentum died. The film lost its anchors. No script has ever surfaced. No pre-production notes have been leaked. It's as if the idea was scrubbed before it could breathe. And maybe that's fitting, because Rolling Thunder was never meant to be a franchise. It was a scar-sharp, singular, and better left untouched. Bonus fact: when fiction leaked into the real world, in 1983, California authorities arrested a Vietnam veteran in connection with a series of violent assaults. But what investigators found in his apartment left them shaken and wondering where the line between film and reality had blurred. Alongside military memorabilia and personal writings, they discovered a heavily played VHS tape of Rolling Thunder. Nearby, a spiral notebook detailed revenge fantasies uncannily similar to scenes from the film. One passage quoted directly from the movie. Another described sharpening a tool, like Rain does. The man had even constructed a crude metal prosthetic to wear over his injured arm. At trial, the defense argued that he was deeply traumatized, mentally unstable, and had latched onto the film as a form of psychological structure. Prosecutors didn't dispute his state of mind, but they pointed to the influence of Rolling Thunder as a template. No formal connection between the crimes and the movie was ever established. The studio faced no lawsuits. The incident was never publicized widely. But behind closed doors, FBI analysts began discussing the case as an example of narrative mirroring when individuals imprint fictional structure onto real behavior. The term never made headline, but within a small circle of psychologists and behavioral experts, the case became a cautionary footnote in the long debate over how much responsibility stories carry when they resonate too deeply. The tape was entered into evidence, the notebook was sealed, and Rolling Thunder remained a film. But not, apparently, for everyone. They called it a revenge film. But Rolling Thunder was always something colder, something quieter. It didn't end with justice, it ended with ritual, with silence, with scars that didn't show. Over time, it became more than a cult classic. It became a warning, or maybe a confession. Which fact haunted you the most? And which forgotten film do you think is hiding truths just like this? Drop your thoughts below, we're listening.